The sound of shattering glass pierced through the warm afternoon air of the roadside diner, followed by a woman's muffled cry that made every soul within earshot freeze in place. Inside that small establishment on Route 66, decorated with faded Americana and dreams of simpler times, Evil wore an expensive suit and a gold Rolex that caught the light with each violent movement. Marcus Chen had pulled his motorcycle into the parking lot just moments before, his leather jacket creaking as he dismounted. Behind him, 7 more bikes rumbled to a stop, their riders removing helmets to reveal faces weathered by wind and sun. They'd been riding for hours, looking forward to nothing more than cold drinks and hot food. But the universe had other plans. Through the diner's window, Marcus watched a scene that turned his blood cold. A man in what had to be a $5,000 suit had a young, pregnant woman by the arm, his face contorted with rage as he shook her like a rag doll. Her other hand instinctively protected her swollen belly while tears streamed down her bruised face. The dozen other patrons in the diner had collectively decided that their coffee and pie were suddenly the most fascinating things in the world, their eyes determinedly fixed on anything except the horror unfolding 5 feet away. "Do you see this?" Marcus's voice was barely a whisper to his brothers behind him. "Yeah, we see it," replied Tommy, a former Marine whose hands were already balling into fists. The well-dressed man's voice carried through the door as it swung open for a departing customer, who practically ran to their car. "You embarrass me one more time, Claire. And I swear to God—" His hand rose, and the pregnant woman flinched, bracing for a blow that every person in that diner knew was coming. And not one of them moved. Not the elderly couple in the corner, Booth, who'd probably been married for 50 years. Not the trucker with arms like tree trunks. Not the waitress whose hand trembled as she poured coffee with her eyes down. Not the manager who'd picked up the phone twice only to set it back down. Fear had many faces that day, but they all wore the same expression: "I don't want to get involved." The man, Claire would later reveal his name, was Richard Blackwell, CEO of Blackwell Industries, worth an estimated $2.3 billion. Had learned long ago that money didn't just buy things. It bought silence. It bought complicity. It bought the ability to do whatever he wanted, wherever he wanted, because people were too afraid of his lawyers, his power, his ability to destroy their lives with a single phone call. He'd been beating Claire for 3 years, ever since their wedding night, when she'd commented that she wished they'd spent more time talking to the guests. The first slap had shocked them both. The second, a week later, came easier. By month 6, the bruises were as much a part of her as her own shadow, strategically placed where designer clothes and expensive makeup could hide them. "Today's crime?" She'd smiled at a waiter. That was it. A simple, polite smile at a young man who'd held the door open for her. Pregnant waddle into this diner. Richard had stewed in silent fury for 20 minutes before exploding, his voice rising with each accusation, his grip tightening until she cried out. "Please," Claire whimpered, her free hand still wrapped protectively around her belly where their daughter grew, blissfully unaware of the monster who'd helped create her. "Not here. Not in front of—" "In front of who?" Richard's laugh was cruel as he glanced around the diner. "These people? They won't do anything. They never do. Do you know why?" He raised his voice, addressing the room like a king before his subjects. "Because they know who I am. They know what I can do." He wasn't wrong. The waitress had recognized him immediately from magazine covers. The manager had Googled his name and saw the photos of him shaking hands with senators and governors. Even the trucker had heard stories of Blackwell, industry's legal team, destroying anyone who crossed them. But Richard Blackwell had never met Marcus Chen or the brothers of the Iron Saints Motorcycle Club. The door swung open and 8 bikers walked in, their boots heavy on the checkered linoleum floor. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Richard's hand, raised and ready to strike Claire across the face, froze in midair. Marcus moved with the careful grace of someone who'd seen violence and hated it but wouldn't run from it. He was 43, a high school teacher during the school year. A man who'd founded the Iron Saints, not as some outlaw gang but as a brotherhood, of men tired of watching their community fall apart. They fixed roofs for elderly neighbors. They escorted abuse survivors to court. They showed up when no one else would. "I think you should let the lady go," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Richard's face cycled through several emotions: surprise, indignation, rage, before landing on entitled fury. "This is none of your business. This is my wife, and what happens between us stopped being private the moment you put your hands on her in public," Tommy interrupted, taking position on Marcus's right. 6 other bikers fanned out, not aggressive, not threatening, just present, immovable. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Richard's voice climbed an octave, his face reddening. This was his go-to move, the threat that made lawyers back down, made police officers apologetic, made problems disappear. "Don't care," Marcus replied simply. The simplicity of that statement seemed to break something in Richard's brain. His whole world was built on people caring who he was, on his name carrying weight, on his wealth buying him immunity from consequence. "I could buy this entire diner. I could buy this whole town. I could make one phone call and end all of your—" "Mister," interrupted Sarah, the smallest of the bikers but whose voice carried steel. "You could own every inch of ground from here to the ocean, and it wouldn't make it okay to beat a pregnant woman. Now let her go." Claire's eyes, which had been cast down in learned helplessness, lifted to meet Sarah's. In that moment something passed between them. Recognition, hope, the desperate need to believe that maybe, just maybe, someone would finally see her. Richard's grip on Claire's arm tightened instead, a last desperate assertion of control. "She's my property. My wife, my—" The slap came not from any of the bikers, but from the elderly woman in the corner booth. She'd stood up, walked across the diner with her cane clicking, and slapped Richard Blackwell across the face with a force that belied her 78 years. "No woman is property. You sorry excuse for a man," she said, her voice shaking with righteous fury. "I've been married 52 years, and my Harold has never raised a hand to me. Not once, not ever." Her husband, Harold, stood beside her, tears in his eyes. "I was scared," he admitted to the room. "Ashamed to say it, but I was scared of what he might do, of getting sued or hurt. But watching you folks walk in here and do the right thing." He looked at Richard with disgust. "Cowards like me let cowards like you happen." The trucker stood next. Then the waitress. Then the manager who finally picked up the phone and dialed 911 for real this time. Richard looked around the diner, watched his power crumble like sand, and did the only thing bullies know how to do when confronted by those who won't back down. He let Claire go and tried to leave. "I don't think so," Marcus said, blocking the door. "You're staying right here until the police arrive." "You can't hold me here. That's kidnapping. I'll sue every one of you for everything." "Sue away," Tommy said with a shrug. "I've got about $400 to my name, and a bike that's held together with duct tape and prayers. You're welcome to it." Claire sank into a booth, and Sarah sat beside her, taking her trembling hand. "How far along are you, honey?" 7 months, Claire whispered. "I was going to leave after she was born. I had a plan. I had money saved in a secret account, and I was going to—" Her voice broke. "But he watches me so closely. He tracks my phone, monitors my credit cards. I can't even go to the bathroom without him timing me." The room collectively exhaled in horrified understanding. This wasn't just assault. It was systematic torture, a prison with invisible bars. The police arrived 12 minutes later. Richard immediately began talking about his lawyers, his connections, his rights. But the senior officer, a woman named Detective Patricia Rodriguez, had seen too many women like Claire to care about a billionaire's threats. "Mr. Blackwell, you're under arrest for assault, domestic violence and assault on a pregnant woman, which is a felony in this state." As she cuffed him, she added, "Your money might buy you the best lawyers, but it can't unring this bell. Every person in this diner is a witness." As Richard was led away, still threatening lawsuits and consequences, Claire looked up at the bikers who'd saved her life. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't think anyone would ever—" "You don't have to thank us," Marcus said gently, "but you do have to promise us something." Promise you'll press charges. Promise you won't go back. Promise that little girl you're carrying will grow up knowing her mother is strong enough to choose herself. Claire's hand went to her belly, and something hardened in her eyes. It wasn't hate. It was something stronger. Resolve. I promise. The Iron Saints stayed at that diner for 3 more hours. They stayed while Claire gave her statement to the police. They stayed while the elderly couple, Harold and his wife Doris, offered Claire their guest room for as long as she needed. They stayed while the manager, tears streaming down his face, apologized over and over for not acting sooner. They stayed while the waitress shared her own story of escaping an abusive marriage and gave Claire the number for a shelter that had saved her life. They stayed because that's what decent people do. 6 months later, Marcus received a letter with a photo. Claire stood in front of a small house she'd bought with money from the divorce settlement that Richard had been forced to pay when the evidence became overwhelming. In her arms was a beautiful baby girl with her mother's eyes. The note read, "Her name is Hope, because that's what you gave me. Thank you for being brave when no one else would." Marcus pinned the photo to his garage wall, next to dozens of others, people they'd helped, lives they'd touched, moments when ordinary folks decided that apathy wasn't an option. The story made national news, not because of Richard Blackwell's fall from grace, though his company did lose several major contracts when partners didn't want to be associated with him. It made news because it asked a question that made people uncomfortable. How many times have we looked away? Richard served 18 months and paid massive fines. More importantly, he became a cautionary tale, proof that money can't buy immunity from basic human decency. But the real story wasn't about Richard at all. It was about 8 people on motorcycles who decided that doing the right thing mattered more than convenience or safety. It was about an elderly couple who found their courage. It was about a waitress and a manager and a trucker who stood up once they saw others stand first. It was about Claire, who discovered that she was never as alone as she thought. And it was about Hope, who would grow up in a world where at least 8 people and counting believed that kindness isn't weakness, that standing up for others is the truest form of strength, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to look away.